Joining me now is Jeff Mendelsohn, the Executive Director of Pro-Israel America, and still with us is Deborah Shushan, the Director of Government Affairs at J Street. Thank you both for joining me this hour. Jeff, I wonder if you agree with some of the points made by speakers in that report. We just saw that Israel may be losing bipartisan support.
Well, I think bipartisan support is absolutely critical for the U.S.-Israel relationship. I agree with that sentiment completely. There have been challenges, but I disagree with the notion that Democrats are abandoning Israel or abandoning the U.S.-Israel relationship. From our perspective, we think it's absolutely critical to have supporters of the U.S.-Israel relationship on both sides of the aisle. And that's why Pro-Israel America in this last election endorsed 76 candidates for Congress on both sides of the aisle.
So how do you feel, Jeff, about Vice President Biden possibly becoming the next president of the United States in terms of how that administration's relations will be with the state of Israel?
Well, we focus on congressional races. That's my caveat that I'll start with. And we did not endorse or get involved in the presidential race one way or the other. That said, Vice President Biden and his vice presidential running mate, Kamala Harris, both have records of support for Israel and for the U.S.-Israel relationship from their time in the Senate and the vice president while he was in the White House. And I'm confident that they would continue that path of supporting a strong and vibrant relationship between our two countries.
And Deborah, the president has, of course, repeated again and again he's the least racist person, he's the least discriminatory person in interviews over and over, but the Jewish community in the U.S. has had concerns with this president and his statements. Talk to us more about that.
Well, I mean, of course, concerns are an understatement. I mean, this is a president who a significant majority of Jewish Americans felt was to some significant extent culpable for the massacre of Jews 2 years ago while praying in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. This is a president who has, just a day or two before the election, his supporters went to a Jewish cemetery in Detroit and spray painted the letters TRUMP on Jewish tombstones here in the United States. This didn't happen in Nazi Germany. Not to mention, of course, what happened in Charlottesville in 2017, the event that precipitated Joe Biden to start thinking about the possibility that he might need to run for election, where you had neo-Nazis marching in the streets of a college town where the University of Virginia is, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And of course, Donald Trump famously said that there are very fine people on both sides. We are at a point in the United States where these incidents of anti-Semitism, white nationalism, obviously also racism, police brutality toward people of color are reaching epidemic levels. And it's very clear that this is being inspired from the White House and that this president has put our community and other marginalized communities as well in danger. And it's fantastic that he will be leaving the White House.
Jeff, do you also share the same concerns that we hear from Deborah?
Well, obviously, I strongly oppose anti-Semitism and bigotry of all forms. I think that for us, the focus, though, is on how do we strengthen America's alliance with Israel, and that's where we put our energies. The candidates that we've supported reflect that support for America's alliance with Israel, and we'll continue to do that.
We've seen, Jeff, Democrats had hoped, we talked about this earlier in the hour, for a blue wave, more wins across the Congress and the House. That hasn't really played out that way. What do you make of the way the map is drawing out before our eyes right now?
Well, I know a lot of people are surprised and are asking questions about polling, and that's a topic that I'm sure there'll be a lot of ink spilled trying to understand that. We had a tremendous night. As I mentioned, we endorsed 76 candidates. 62 of them have won both sides of the aisle, and I think I think the takeaway there is that strong support for Israel is good policy, it's good politics, and it does run deep in both parties.
Deborah, in terms of the concerns you were raising just now, where should a Biden administration begin the process of mending?
Well, there is obviously so much for the Biden administration to do. Our country is facing overlapping multiple crises. Obviously, at the top of the list, we have the coronavirus that the president of the United States has allowed to reach epidemic proportions here in the United States. This is the man who has, of course, conducted maskless rallies that, according to a Stanford University study, in and of themselves, those rallies likely have caused about 700 deaths. Not to mention, of course, letting the pandemic generally run rampant. Obviously, there is also the economic crisis that the United States is facing. We have the climate crisis, and of course, the reckoning in terms of police brutality and the need for racial justice. I mean, I think those four crises are at the top of the list, and they are the top concerns of Jewish Americans. In terms of what Jeff just spoke about, that his preeminent concern is with the U.S.-Israel relationship, and that's where his organization places its energies. One thing to keep in mind is that, according to our polling, when Jews are given Jewish Americans, voters, are given a list of 14 issues, policy issues, and asked which of them concerns them most, Israel comes in pretty close to last on the list. I mean, our top priorities are things like controlling the pandemic, the economy, healthcare, the Supreme Court, racial justice. All of those things come in well ahead of the U.S.-Israel relationship, as is completely appropriate because we are citizens of the United States. So, I'm also very happy to talk about the views that most American Jews have about Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship. But, it is important to keep in mind that that is not the top priority for Jewish Americans, and that's not what the vast majority of Jewish Americans vote on.
And on that point, Jeff, I'd like to ask you, there's been concern here maybe among the Israeli government that after 4 years of a very close relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, a new administration could maybe bring about changes the Israeli government might not be happy with. How do you imagine a Biden-Harris administration and its relationship with Israel?
Well, I think the relationship would be good. I know that Vice President Biden has personal relationships with people in Israel from his many years of public service, and I am sure that he would want to build on those relationships. Just to respond to the comment before, I wasn't saying that the U.S.-Israel relationship was the only issue that voters or Americans care about, but because it is an important issue and because it can be ignored in the shuffle, it's very important for us to focus attention on that issue and help build and secure support in both parties in Congress so that the relationship can be at all times strong and productive. And I think having a strong pro-Israel Congress would actually help a President Biden implement the policies that he wants to implement to further the relationship with Israel.
It certainly seems that at this point that Biden is likely to become the next president of the United States. And all our guests here, including you two, have again repeated that he will be a good friend to Israel. So here's to hoping for that. Jeff Mendelsohn and Deborah Shushan, thank you very much for joining me this hour. We'll